Journey to the West, an audio drama series. Production notes. Episode 2. Hello, dear listeners. This is Lynn, the voice of the fifth monkey. Welcome again to Production Notes, where we discuss everything that couldn't make the main script, mostly hard decisions of the translator. In the last episode, we covered some of the basics, so in this episode, we will get to the finer matters. And again, this is just me rambling, so I hope you're as relaxed as you can be. Picking up from where we left off in the previous episode, we were on to the way we translated character names. I talked about why we chose to say the names in Mandarin or Sanskrit first, before moving on to an English name if there is one. But the novel was written in Chinese. All originally Sanskrit names have already been translated into Chinese. What do we do then? How do we stay consistent in the chapters that follow? This isn't just a problem for making this drama, but you can also feel the struggle from the two English translators of the novel. For various reasons, neither were very consistent with the way they treated these names, so we knew this is something we had to have a protocol for before starting. And here's what we did. If the name originated in Chinese, good. Pronounce the Mandarin ones and translate the name as accurately as we can. And we will be using the translated name from now on. An example would be the Jade Emperor, 玉皇大帝, who famously said, "There's nothing remarkable about it," a sentence he would deeply regret saying later. Next, if the name originated from Sanskrit, and the subject in question still very much exists in the Indian Buddhist context, we will not present the Mandarin pronunciation and only explain in English. Examples would be the names of the 4 continents, and many Buddhist deities who will appear later in the story. Their Mandarin names may or may not be transliterations from Sanskrit, and it would take too much time to explain, so we will also leave that out. But don't worry, for the important characters, we will make sure to discuss in more detail here in production notes. The third type is the trickiest. A name may have originated from Sanskrit, but the subject in question has been fully incorporated into the Chinese context. A god could have arrived in China as a foreigner, but over the years of cultures mixing and evolving, they have become an inseparable part of Chinese mythology. And many Chinese may not even know they weren't a native. In that case, we will maybe briefly mention their Sanskrit origins, but we will translate from their Chinese names directly. 2 examples you may have already heard are Yan Wang, or King Yan, or Yama in Sanskrit, and later Patriarch Puti. Yan Wang is widely accepted as the ruler of the underworld in Chinese culture by the time the novel was written, despite the character having come from Yama, the deity of death in Hindu and Buddhist religion. Chinese people have given Yan Wang a Chinese face, Chinese clothing, and Chinese values. He is very much his own character and distinct from Yama. In that case, there's no reason for us to keep calling him Yama because the character we're meeting in the novel isn't a Hindu god, but a powerful bureaucrat of the underworld who works in a very Chinese governmental structure. The same goes for Patriarch Shuputi or Subhuti. Yes, the term Shuputi is obviously a transliteration of the word Subhuti. Subhuti of the Buddhist religion was a student of the Buddha, but Wukong's first teacher was never depicted as a Buddhist monk, but rather a powerful immortal of no clear religious leaning. If you check how he was portrayed in illustrations dating back from Qing Dynasty to the present day, as well as on screen, he was never a monk, but more often a silver-haired, Taoist-like figure. His teachings are also a mixture of multiple schools of thoughts. On top of that, the author never told us which religion he belonged to. That is why after a brief mention, we will only be calling him Puti and not Subhuti. There will be a lot of other names that will go through the above process, and we will make sure to explain them later on. With that out of the way, let's talk about our main character, Sun Wukong. At the end of chapter 1, you heard Puti explain why he gave the monkey the last name Sun. He dissected the characters for Husun, meaning macaque, before telling us why Hu is a bad choice and Sun represented a better meaning. He said, Xi refers to a small infant. The original text was 细者婴细也. Literally, 细 means 婴细. The most common meaning for 婴 is baby, and the second 细 means small, tiny, fine. So in both Yu and Jenner versions, the sentence was translated to 细 means baby. However, if we actually look at all the existing meanings of the first 细, in whatever context, none of it meant baby. None. Yes, 婴 can mean baby, but we do not see a clear connection between 细and 婴if 婴 means baby. This was one of the toughest hurdles we faced when writing the first chapter, because there was no clear way for us to make sense of the sentence. At first, we tried to find a breakthrough in 婴 instead of the first 细. We know the first 细's most common meaning is to tie, to connect. Coincidentally, the original meaning of 婴 is also to wear, to twine, to surround. In fact, baby is only an extended meaning of 婴 as it replaced another character. So if 婴 is a verb, then 婴细 can be understood as untwining a fine thread, which then can correspond to the first 细. And because 婴 is in the equation, its other meaning, baby, can finally be used to explain Puti's decision. It's a lot, I know, but that seemed to be the only logical choice as we haven't been able to find a convincing argument on how the sentence should be interpreted. The majority of articles simply said, 细 means baby, despite it not making very clear sense. Some suggested that 婴细 might refer to the umbilical cord, which we also can't find solid support for. In desperation, we ended up turning to Mr. Li Tianfei, who annotated the 2014 edition of Journey to the West. Mr. Li, who was generous enough to send us a reply, gave us new perspectives into this question. He said that this whole 细 means 婴细 business could very well have been a slip of tongue coming from the oral circulation of the story. For those of you unfamiliar with how stories circulated in ancient China, a lot of people, in particular, the grassroots, did not have the time and luxury to actually read a book. Many were simply illiterate. So storytelling was often done by marketplace performers with their mouths and maybe a few simple tools in front. In that setting, reading a story word by word was simply not plausible. As a result, each performer would improvise and add their own ideas to the story as it spread. So when it eventually got printed, some parts just seemed kind of random and out of place. In terms of why 婴细 is chosen to explain 细, Mr. Li suggested that it may simply be to form opposite meanings with the previous character, 虎, which was dissected into 古, meaning old, and 月, meaning moon. So on one side you have old and yin, on the other side you have sun and small infant, forming a neat antonymic relation. The fact that the to tie 细 is a homophone for the thin 细 may also have played a role in cementing this sentence that troubled our team for so long. In conclusion, we chose the interpretation that makes the most sense to us with what we can find. We may be wrong. That's certainly possible. But we also felt it is important to offer an explanation to our listeners. Consider this an act of 抛砖引玉. I'm throwing out the brick in the hope that someone will come forward with jade. If we have a better argument for this very small but very important part of the story, please let us know. Whew. Yeah, so that was a thing. And while we're at it, it's worth mentioning that without Mr. Li's annotations, we wouldn't be able to explain to you how the gate of dong, in fact, refers to sexual intercourse. The original text was very cryptic and could be easily passed for ordinary exercise and alchemical practices. For detailed descriptions on what each gate entails, please refer to the full novel. Moving on, here's something maybe bilingual readers can appreciate. In Chinese, though we have meanings assigned to each character, when characters form a word, sometimes it's not a simple addition of their meanings. 1 plus 1 doesn't always equal to 2. More often, the implied meanings should be prioritized rather than a simple direct translation. For example, in the word 洞天, 洞 means cave, 天 means sky, heaven. So you're definitely not wrong to say the water curtain cave is a cave heaven, as the stone tablet claimed. However, 洞天 has its extended meanings in Chinese culture. It does not mean a literal cave, but rather a hidden place of ultimate bliss where immortals live and cultivate. It's their residence, and more often than not, it's a complex of gardens, rooms, and buildings. Again, not a literal hole on the mountain, which is why we let go of the cave heaven translation and went for hidden paradise instead, because that actually conveys more of the implied meanings of 洞天. An even simpler example would be 洗耳. 洗 means to wash, and 耳 means ear. 洗耳 literally means washing the ear, but it rarely means to physically clean the ear, but rather to pay full attention and listen carefully. Bilingual listeners will be able to find more examples in the future, and when you do, just note that this is our logic behind each translation. Moving on, and a callback to the last episode, units and numbers. Previously, we talked about why it is important to keep on using the original Chinese units, but we also briefly mentioned how numbers don't always refer to their exact amount. In Chapter 2, we get two very good examples. One is the distance the somersault cloud can travel. Yes, we did compare it to the circumference of Earth, but the core takeaway was actually much simpler. This is a very long distance. 108,000 li, and no matter which dynasty this li is from, is an enormous distance almost beyond imagination, which makes it a perfect number to describe the incredible powers of the somersault cloud. This number will show up again in future chapters, so it's also an important reference point in and of itself. Basically, what we're seeing here is this number serving more of a hyperbolic role, acting as a shock factor to the readers. Converting it to physical distance actually renders it meaningless because the story of Journey to the West happened in an alternative universe, meaning that any comparison with real-world geological data mean absolutely nothing to the characters in it. So that was the big number example we just covered. And now we move on to a smaller number. In Chapter 2, Wukong was described as 4 尺 tall. Some ended up using this number as an official description of his height. However, do keep in mind that this wasn't Wukong's own words, but rather mockery coming from an enemy. So it is totally possible that the monstrous king of chaos chose a smaller number just to piss Wukong off. We're not trying to judge what is right and what is wrong here, but only to remind listeners to caution when it comes to numbers. Understand their context, seek their implied meanings, and refrain from converting them out of relevance. Speaking of context, in Chapter 2, when Wukong returned home, he saw cranes calling and apes wailing on his way, and soon he was home and saw his crying monkey children. Here we would like to point out to you that cranes calling and apes wailing are common symbols in Chinese writing for miserable and tragic feelings. Wailing is somewhat of an imposed word as it refers more to the writer, in other words, the human's personal emotions rather than an accurate description of common calling sounds of wild apes. Which means these wailing apes have nothing to do with the crying monkeys on the mountain of flower and fruit. They serve a descriptive purpose, and that's it. Okay, now on to the final topic, which will also be an ongoing theme in the chapters to come. Contradictions. I hope you have finished Chapter 2 by now. And did you ever wonder, why did Wukong give such a detailed account of his journey to his monkey children, despite Patriarch Puti's warning? He wasn't even supposed to utter a single word of it, but he did, and almost blurting out the whole name. And nothing happened? How did that work? Our answer? Recall the previous episode? Keyword. Multiple contributors, multiple contributors, multiple contributors. If it doesn't make sense, we just have to deal with it. Like we said before, Journey to the West isn't known for its watertight logic. As you can already tell from the whole "xi" means baby saga, there are quite a few places in the original novel that contradict each other. Our job is to present the story to you as faithfully as possible, but there are tangles we cannot untie. After all, our wish is to act as a gateway to the novel. If picking up the book to solve these contradictions means leaving this channel, more power to you. Hopefully you will find the novel exponentially more entertaining, and that would mean we've done our job. So just remember our keyword every time you feel like something is off. Before we end this episode, we would like to remind you again that English subtitles are available for episodes of both the main story and production notes. In addition, subtitles in Chinese will be provided for production notes like this one. And that's all for this episode. Don't forget to 一键三连 or subscribe. This is the Fifth Monkey, and thank you for listening.